One of the most memorable and highest grossing films in 2023 was Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, climbing to top 3 worldwide in revenue, making over $975 million, just below Super Mario Bros. And Barbie. It was a riveting, insightful, and impactful 3-hour-long movie that stuck with me, inspiring me to read its inspiration, which was the Pulitzer Prize-winning biography, American Prometheus: The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer. By the title, I'm sure you guessed that this is what this video is about. Specifically, in this, I will share my thoughts, talk a little bit about how it compares to the movie, what it covers, some of the big takeaways, along with the interesting facts within this biography, with the goal of doing this book justice by giving you insight on what this book holds in an entertaining way. Before I dive into this book, it's only right to start with the recipients of the Pulitzer Prize for this biography. Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin are the 2 collaborating authors. Martin sadly passed away in 2021, spending his professional life being an American historian, mainly focusing on the nuclear environment, publishing 2 other books tied to nuclear warfare. A cool fact about Sherwin is that by coincidence or not, he was a faculty member at Berkeley, California, and Princeton University, 2 prestigious universities that Oppenheimer himself also spent working and elevating for many years. Sherwin's counterpart, Kai Bird, is an American author who has published many biographies covering people around politics, helping him work his way to being an executive director of the Graduate Center's Leon Levy Center for Biography. Kai and Sherwin eventually published American Prometheus in 2005 after crafting it for 25 years, 22 more than the entire Manhattan Project took to complete. In that time, they did countless interviews, analyzed countless older interviews, went through textbook magazines, major articles, dissertations, manuscripts, even went through unclassified documents, all to try and piece together the truth about Robert's life, who, quote, was an enigma whose legacy still has a presence worldwide today. Needless to say, they accomplished just that by breaking down American Prometheus into 5 seamless parts. Part 1 kicks off exploring his development in childhood through college and then up to Robert's early days as a professor. Oppenheimer's childhood, like anyone's, was heavily influenced by education and his 2 parents. His father was Julius Oppenheimer and mother Ella Friedman. Julius was an immigrant to the United States, leaving Germany in 1888 for a promising job opportunity at a relative's business importing men's suit linings. This business started thriving, allowing Julius to slowly work up the ladder up to the point of becoming a lucrative full partner. In fact, Julius's net worth rose to several $100,000, equivalent to a multi-millionaire today. A lucrative career wasn't the only thing he found in New York. As rumor has it, he found his wife Ella at an art gallery as an artist. The 2 married in 1903 and had Robert in 1904. The tandem provided Oppenheimer with a loving, peaceful, and some could say luxurious childhood. As Robert put it, "My life as a child did not prepare me for the fact that the world is full of cruel and bitter things." His mother Ella was overly protective to a fault, sheltering him for a long period of time, while Julius, what I got from the reading, was a little bit more distant, but a provider, as Oppenheimer described him as. His idea of what to do for people was to let them find out what they wanted. Something he did for Robert, and a characteristic shown when he was a professor, as I will get into later. Julius and Ella saw his intellectual capacity at a very young age, and the last thing they wanted to do was hinder the growth. Quote, "He was a dreamer, so they chose to cultivate his dreams through private school, specifically called Ethical Culture School, a new school founded by Felix Adler, who opened his doors for many Jewish people at a time where many doors were closing, which made it a very enticing spot for the Oppenheimers. The school focused on ethics and preached optimistic values. One value that stood out was one Adler told Robert's senior class: to see things not as they are, but as they might be. An optimistic value for anyone, but this one stood out due to its prevalence and correlation with Oppenheimer's life later on, during and after the Manhattan Project. Like many other scientists working on the project, he questioned and tried to predict the impact of what they were creating and bringing to the world. In Adler's words, to see the world as it might be. College is where the molding and refining took place, guiding Robert to a purpose. However, that journey to discovery wasn't always pleasant. His collegiate career started at Harvard, quickly leading to low points physically and emotionally, until eventually starting to struggle with depression, even at his next stop at Cambridge. His depression had numerous roots. Two anchors were professors he did not care much for, and the lab work that he struggled with and did not care much for, as shown in the movie. College brought difficult years, yet led to reflection and growth. Cambridge introduced him to inspiring idols like Bohr, introduced him to books like Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, and changed his major from chemistry to physics. All of this helped shed the depression and begin to mold the confidence and allure that helped him be a leader for students in a successful $2 billion project. Robert's final chapter as a graduate student was at Göttingen, a public university in Germany, where he collaborated with many bright minds and started connecting with fellow classmates, all while being mentored by Born, and at the end started to thrive in theoretical physics. So much so, he became the creator of the theoretical physics program at the University of California, Berkeley, and where he became a guide, friend, and ally to many of his students. Part 2 explores a wide range of topics like the complex weaving of Oppenheimer's communist ties that were utilized as ammunition against him later in life, even though, as the book made it clear, he never was officially a part of the Communist Party. It dived into romantic relationships, like the unpredictable one with Jean Tatlock, to the enduring one with Kitty. Interpersonal relationships, like the bond with his brother, to the bond he formed with students as a professor, guiding them like a father, with traits similar to Julius Oppenheimer, and letting them find out what they wanted. Oppie, as the students called him, one time planted something for a student to find. A student named Weinberg went to his office one day and saw a piece of paper on the table and thought it was inspiring for his thesis. Oppenheimer immediately told him to put it down, and he was confused and puzzled by it for weeks. Later on, Weinberg found out that Oppie planted it for another student to find who was struggling to find a thesis and needed some direction, and it ended up being perfect for that student. Another example of his unique style and how in tune he was with his students was once he structured a whole lecture just to intrigue one student. Both structured ways to try and help someone find what they want. How in tune Oppie was with his students and the amount of care he put into being a professor really jumped out to me as a college student, and where I've seen many different or had many different professors. And that level of guidance and care from a professor, from my perspective and opinion, is something that's rare when looking at the majority of the bigger universities. And that's not blaming professors. Sure, there are bad ones, just like in any profession or any walks of life. But class sizes make it impossible for a professor to have that connection with many of the students, in turn capping the amount of growth students can have and making college feel a little bit more isolating in an individual path. Anyways, another aspect I found interesting was the material at the end of part 2. This section discussed the intricate details of how Robert was brought into the Manhattan Project by General Groves and how controversial that decision was. Groves said this about the hiring of Oppie: "I had no support, only opposition." A large reason for that was Robert's loose connections with the CP party, but Groves did not mind that. Long story short, he thought of Oppenheimer as a genius and agreed of many of his thoughts and ideas about the project when they first met, in turn leading to his critical and brilliant decision. Part 3 was where the meat of the Manhattan Project was, covering everything you could think of or not. It covered why Oppie chose the place for the project with the help of Edwin McMillan. One of the most interesting points was the level of security around the project, leading to an inside battle between the scientists and the generals. Majority of the scientists, including Robert, claimed that sharing ideas with other scientists that weren't in the project, or maybe even other countries, allied countries, would help progress the work faster, while the generals and government officials said that it was way too risky and favored heavy compartmentalization. Generals and government officials eventually got their way, leading to them enforcing strict compartmentalization, in turn raising the difficulty and the comfortability for many scientists. In fact, some were so pissed off that they chose to retaliate. Richard Feynman was a notable one, who to retaliate opened locks on secret file cabinets all over the lab for the guards to find. He would also mess with the watchtower guards along with other pranks, almost getting him arrested. Others flat out could not stand it, like Robert's Göttingen classmate Edward Condon, who quit after just 6 weeks, feeling that the security measures had them doing the work, quote, 3 hands tied behind your back. Oppenheimer had an interesting perspective on the whole security dilemma. Here's an excerpt from the book. Quote, "My view about the whole damn thing, of course, is that the basic information we are working on is probably known to all the governments that care to find out. The information about what we're doing is probably of no use because it is so damn complicated. The danger," he said, "was not the technical information about the bomb might leak to another country. The real secret was the intensity of our effort and the scale of the international investment involved. If other governments understood the resources America was throwing into the bomb effort, they might attempt to duplicate the bomb project. Oppenheimer didn't think even this knowledge would have any effect on Russia, but it might have a very big effect on Germany. And I am as convinced about that as everyone else is." But even with that, the secrecy and just the high level of security got overburdening at some times and started to loosen up at the end. Another piece that stood out from part 3 was the amount of praise there was for Oppenheimer's leadership. Hans Bethe said this: "Los Alamos might have succeeded without him, but certainly only with much greater strain, less enthusiasm, and less speed. As it was an unforgettable experience for all the members of the laboratory. There were other wartime laboratories of high achievement, but I have never observed in any one of these other groups quite the spirit of belonging together, quite the urge to reminisce about the days of the laboratory, quite the feeling that this was really the great time of their lives. That this was true of Los Alamos was mainly due to Oppenheimer. He was a leader." Part 4 starts off with the bombings and the aftermath. Like the movie showed, Oppie had no idea when the bombings would happen, ultimately finding out like the rest of the nation on the radio. For him, the aftermath was one full of grief, fear, and determination that the weapons like he helped introduce into the world would never be used again. The problem was, though, his opinions and beliefs weren't shared by everyone in the government and by all the scientists. Some people's fear about these weapons were answered by ideas of making even bigger weapons like the hydrogen bomb, all leading to even more fear and eventually the race with Russia in the Cold War as we know it. At this point, the remainder of the book is about the downfall, or as the book puts it, the tragedy of Oppenheimer. There was a lot of information about the tragedy of Oppenheimer, and if you're interested, I highly suggest read the book. I'll try just to quickly sum it up. This part of part 4 gives the motives behind Strauss, along with the dirty tactics that were employed to tear Oppie down, utilizing his past and different opinions about the hydrogen bomb. Robert was put under a microscope with no privacy, as the FBI and investigators were always tracking him and trying to listen to what he was talking about with other colleagues. The treatment he received dumbfounded many people, including Einstein, who thought Oppenheimer worked very hard for his country, and if this was how they were going to repay him, he should leave. He did not do that, though, as the book talked about. He loved this country, the United States, too much. Robert decided actually to take a job from Strauss himself at Princeton to be the director of advanced study at the Institute, and where he found success, but it did not prevent him from being brutally torn down publicly and physically, leading to health issues for not just himself, but others. Admiral William Deke Parson ended up having a heart attack that killed him the night after he found out about all the news and the public morale surrounding Oppenheimer. And yes, the heart attack probably could have been because of many different things, but his wife believed that it was brought on from the news. Part 5 wraps up the book like the movie kind of wraps up itself, with the brutal hearings that Robert had to endure and the dirty and aggressive tactics that were used against Robert, his defendants, and lawyers. Also touches on his closing times at Princeton and his later stage of life where he escaped his legacy at the Virgin Islands. All interesting information that I could dive into, but this video is probably going to be one of my longest videos ever. So I highly suggest, if you're interested, pick up the book. Overall, that was a somewhat fast skim of a book that has chest full of information. One of my biggest takeaways from American Prometheus is by no means a revolutionary takeaway, but it just opened my eyes even more to how much power and responsibility we put in the hands of relatively a few amount of people. This whole book showcases how important and vital good leaders are, especially during times of conflict. Just look at the decision to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'm not here to say whether it was right or wrong, but the facts are that a small group of individuals decided the fate of many civilian lives. It was a tough decision, and hindsight always knows best. But they thought the best decision was to use the 2 bombs and withhold information from many people like Oppenheimer and many who were involved in the Manhattan Project, who even publicly expressed doubt about finishing the project after Hitler's death. One scientist, I think pronounced Silzard, was fearful of an armed race with Russia. Quote, "I was concerned at this point that we might start an arms race between America and Russia, which might end with the destruction of both countries." Yet was not consulted in the final decisions, and even when asked for opinions, they were withheld critical information, like Truman and high officials getting reports that Japan was close to surrendering, especially with Russia about to aid the United States. It was deceitful, but Truman and other high officials made the decision that they thought was best. No one knows at the same outcome or what could have happened if the bombs were not used. But the point is, a lot of power is in the hands of a relatively few amount of people, making those few critical for us to get right, or who knows the impact it could have for future generations. Another interesting takeaway I had is Oppenheimer's legacy related to the bomb and how his hopes were withered away very quickly. Initially, after the bombing, he was hopeful that this could be a wake-up for humanity, as seen in a speech right after the bombing. Quote, "The peoples of this world must unite or they will perish. This war that has ravaged so much of the earth has written these words. The atomic bomb has spelled them out for all men to understand. Other men have spoken them in other times, of other wars, of other weapons. They have not prevailed. There are some, misled by a false sense of history, who hold that they will not prevail today. It is not for us to believe that. By our works we are committed to a world united before the common peril in law and humanity." When looking at it today, it has united the world in some type of way about fear of the weapons, and we have not seen, thankfully, a Hiroshima or Nagasaki to this day. However, it has not provided the unity and peace like he hoped. The book, like the movie, showcased him figuring that out very fast with people's opinions on the hydrogen bomb and the fear of Russia, which is an aspect that is brilliantly done by this book. It captures how Oppenheimer is and his feelings about what he helped create, but also what others were thinking and what led to the decisions that were made that shaped the world we all live in today. It's an interesting story in where Oppenheimer achieved almost an impossible goal, along with many others, but that goal It caused the electric, the confident, alluring physicist slowly to wither away from a storm internally and externally. Just from reading the book, it sounded like he had immense guilt for what happened and that he had blood on his hands. But that motivated him to try and find a solution, but was only hindered by adversaries that did not agree with his opinions. It makes me wonder how many other people on a smaller scale achieve goals that they set out to achieve, and those goals slowly wither them away. And what does that say about majority of our goals we make for ourselves? So there it is. There are some of the biggest takeaways that I took from this book and I wanted to put in this video. But before I end this video, I just want to go over a cool fact from this text. One interesting fact that stood out was that on September 1st, 1939, the popular known date for the day Hitler invaded Poland, was also the same day Oppenheimer and Hartland Snyder published a paper that didn't get much recognition at the time, but now is recognized as, quote, the mathematical description of a black hole. In a sense, he was one of the first to think about black holes and think about them mathematically. It's crazy in itself, but it's another layer when a black hole of evil started to form on Earth on the same day that paper was published. Overall, that is it for this video. It's one that I've wanted to make for a while now. It's took me a long time just struggling to try and find an entertaining way to tell or give some insight about this book while also doing it justice. I hope I got close, or just hopefully insightful in some way for someone. It's an incredible piece of work that's tragic, inspiring, and insightful, published in 2005, about someone who died in 1967, whose legacy still haunts us or protects us to this day. Thank you for watching. Peace.